Anyway, I think that we're gonna go ahead and check up on the on Morphologist's newest video, and it says here that Star Citizen's endgame content could be amazing. And I mean, like, hey, Morphologist has some interesting takes, but this one here, I mean, like, we'll see. Lots of people they give him a bad rap because they're like, oh, he's so negative and stuff. But we'll see how people we'll see the comments when he says good stuff about Star Citizen. Let's see. All right, let's get into it then.
Star Citizen is nowhere near complete, but every patch brings us a little bit closer to a more finished game, albeit sometimes at a slower pace than some of us wish. Still though, today players can enjoy a number of professions and activities that offer enough gameplay to keep at least some of us busy for a while. However, sooner or later players inevitably run up against the wall that is the unfinished state of Star Citizen. But plainly, there really isn't much progression after you play the few loops that there are, let alone an end goal or end game.
Yeah.
And arguably, since all
I mean, like, I've made this point a few times, in fact, with it just today, you know, like, if you're brand new to Star Citizen and you played it when 3.0 came out, and you did all the things that were there, and then you had to play it, like, this month during a free fly, the general gist is similar. You know, like, we might have new locations and stuff, but what a new player will look for and look at, say the mission scheduler, hasn't really changed all that much. Like, even the names of missions are more or less the same. So, like, from a new player perspective, it's very hard to see what's changed, even when so much has changed.
Ships are available on the website for purchase with real money, it makes them a bit counterfeit as a form of end-game stuff. So then what is it exactly that our chosen professions are going to add up to? More accurately, what goal do we strive for as an organization of players? Well, one possibility would be stations or organization-owned stations. So join me then on this dive into what the future might hold for Star Citizen when it comes to players building stations. But don't forget that if—
Alright, so as far as we know about stations, there's a jump point that's about 6 or so years old now, and it talked about them thinking about how parts of this sort of gameplay will be not implemented, but like how they've been tackling how they would work and whether or not they want stations to have similar, how would you say, destructibility and usability as spaceships. So like, let's say if a space station had, you know, like solar panels, for instance, like in this image here, you know, like, and somebody came in to like destroy those solar panels, then that would, you know, like cause a power fluctuation or power shortage or power cut on that station and that kind of thing. It's a very interesting, like, I guess, okay, what if players own stations? I think that the idea is that there are going to be quite a few like derelict stations. What players do with those derelicts is to be seen. Whether or not CIG wants people to be able to say, oh, I claim this station, we don't know. It's not something that they've spoken about, and so it's a very interesting topic in general. But I think arbitrarily owning stations, saying I own this because I have the guns to maintain it, is something you can do already. People do that with SPK all the time. But I think for the most part, why would you want a space station when you have a capital ship that can move around? You know, why should you be on Deep Space Nine except for, you know, the fact that you are the emissary to the Bajoran like prophets or whatever, when you can be in, you know, like on Voyager flying about the place, you know? Like, it doesn't make too much sense for a station to be your endgame, especially when capital ships are of the same size or bigger.
If by the end you think
they're indestructible, they don't have to be indestructible. They are currently.
Did a good job with this video and you think I deserve it, don't forget to hit that like and subscribe button. You can also find me over on my Twitch channel by the same name, as well as on TikTok and Twitter. X. Now it's called X. So to be upfront with you here, very little of Star Citizen's planned endgame is actually understood. The only really significant thing they've ever discussed was the ability for us to obtain the Bengal carrier in the game.
Yeah, and to obtain the Bengal class carrier, they did mention that you weren't just going to be able to fly it. You'd have to find it, and then you'd have to retrofit it. You'd have to like get the components to get it working. And so, and this thing is like 1.5 kilometers long or something. So, and it has a train inside it too. So for all intents and purposes, the Bengal class carrier is this endgame station that Morph has in mind, I feel.
something that would only exist in 4 different locations and thus would be limited in the ability for orgs to obtain them. They would also require being captured and repaired,
There
so
you go.
it's not something that you can just buy. However, only a few orgs are likely ever going to have the resources to compete for it. And once it's obtained, the only way that anybody else is going to get their hands on it is if they fight the org that has it for that big ship.
And I think just because of that, like, if there are only going to be 4 Bengal class carriers in existence, and they are a kilometer long, and they do whatever the heck they do, then, like, I think that the next best thing shouldn't be a space station necessarily, because, like, what is the difference between that and a space station? Generally speaking, I think when it comes to value for orgs, it's gonna be like, you know, planetary locations and being able to control, like, you know, nodes for mining and stuff. Honestly, like, resources and holding the keys to those resources, I think, are gonna be more important than having an arbitrary station where you can hang out and, like, you know, use barista NPCs.
And that surely is going to be exciting for those competing for the Bengal. But as I said, there's only so many of them, and there's gonna need to be something else for people to do, some other type of endgame as an alternative or to do alongside seeking the Bengal.
All right.
Well, it just might be player-owned stations, at least organization-owned stations to
Imagine
be more
mode
specific.
activated,
These would
100%.
be smaller stations than what we have now, Lagrange points or floating around planets and moons. These wouldn't compete necessarily with them, but would offer some benefits to encourage players and organizations to get them. They could, say for example, offer larger organization storage for ships, money, and vehicles. They could have org headquarters, a place to call home, to meet and to decorate, a place to respawn, a tax collection source for them to make money, a manufacturing base for crafting the things that you need as well as selling them, a place to make ship parts and ship weapons.
So pretty much everything here the Morphologist has talked about is currently already covered within all the Lagrange stations that we have right now. As far as like what CIG have in store for how they're supposed to be used, like the cargo guild and, like, you know, the refinery area and the mining guild and stuff like that. There's supposed to be reputation tied to those things, and the higher your reputation, the better they treat you. So, like, I mean, you could, I suppose, you know, have a station that, like, you have that already, but what's the point? It seems like, what's the word, tautological, when, like, it's already planned for these other stations. Like, I like the idea of having home base, but why not have a flotilla, like, you know, Quarian style, or, like, you know, why not just have one capital ship? Why a station at all? But I guess if these sorts of gameplay things are part of it, it makes sense, especially if it's safe. But there isn't really much safer than, like, just going to one of these things in a green zone, you know what I mean? Like, the Stanton system on release is going to be a lot safer than it is right now. Why not just make one of those stations your home base instead of seeking out one remotely? I think that, like, let's say, you know, let's play devil's advocate. The Pyro system isn't very populated. As far as we know, it's just some pirates, and, like, you know, it's huge, right? It's a massive expanse of space, and not everything is as populated or as corporate as the Stanton system is. So if you want to, you know, wanted to have a base of operations out there in the fringes, then, like, yeah, having a station that you maintain with your guild, your org, or your alliance is probably going to make a lot more sense. I think if what he's talking about here ever comes into fruition, it's going to have to be one of those things where it's like a fringe case kind of thing.
Character armor, character weapons, and even ship industrial parts. There are frankly a lot of opportunities and benefits that you could tag along with stations. But the actual gameplay is going to come along with the process of getting it, maintaining it, and defending it. So let's go through the potential process of getting a station that could be within the bounds of Star Citizen's universe and mechanics as we know them today.
I think when it comes to defending the station, though, I mean, like, with MMOs that give you the opportunity to raid somebody else's station, you can't just do it 24/7 whenever you want. There are windows in which, you know, like, you can invade. Otherwise, you know, people have to be online all the time. A game like SC tries to avoid arbitrary mechanics like that as much as possible, so I don't know if they'll even entertain it in the first place, but we'll see.
So the first phase would be in choosing the location for your organization to establish a station. Stations wouldn't come pre-built. These are something that organizations would have to build, and I envision this happening in two ways for getting a place to build a station.
Like
the first
Pioneer
option
style?
would be find a place in a safe and controlled area of space, somewhere in what you might call high sec or high security space, a place like the Stanton system.
If you're in high spec, why would you even need your own station at that point? Like, it kind of defeats the object.
But this option would have a rental-only option for those claims. You couldn't own them as an organization since the space was already owned by an either government organization or private organization from the NPC factions. But the benefit of this would be good security as well as high traffic areas that could yield good profits for the owning organization. There would, however, be only a set number of locations at Lagrange points, moons, and planet orbital points that you could obtain as an org, and probably there should be a maximum amount of these things that you could actually claim so that you would leave the place open for other people to give it a try. It would also not require just currency, but also reputation with the owning NPC faction. You would have to be in good standing with them in order to qualify to make the claim. Everyone in the org then would need to work together to gain a reputation with that organization so that they could get the cash to get the claim. The second option might be a little bit more exciting. It would involve you going to a lower security area that was less controlled and maybe unowned by any official organization. These systems would have high potential for profits due to rare resources and low competition, but importantly, the risk would be very high. Here then, instead of paying an organization for the claim, you would have to go there and claim it yourself while it's contested by either players or NPCs.
From what we know about just places in general and like how claiming has been laid out with the claim marker stuff, you're not able to make claims in own space. You know, you have to go out to the fringes and claim those spaces. If they were to do like a thing like this, I don't know how much they would, venture from what they currently have. Otherwise, mechanically, it's going to be a bit confusing. Owning like a station in a controlled space doesn't make too much sense to me. But again, we have our Imagine hats on right now, and I'm not trying to counter things. I'm just trying to think, from what we know, how feasible it would be. Somebody in chat mentioned passive income. Yeah, this is all just theory crafting, by the way, guys. 100% just theory crafting. Somebody mentioned passive income. I mean, how would you get passive income by having a place that's already owned by somebody else? That's why I think that when it comes down to this, having a space station doesn't make too much sense to me. If all this that Morpholage was talking about was in planet side, next to a node on a planet that had a high yield of something that you need, like a fuel or or it would make more sense to me, because then you also have something to fight for. Obviously, there are mine claims and stuff out in space. There are entire missions that are based around this, and plunking down a station around those makes sense, I guess. I think that would give more credence to this. But right now, I'm not really buying the sell.
Alternatively, if the area is already claimed by an NPC pirate faction like, say, the Ninetales, then you would have to have good rep with them in order to not incur constant attacks on your station. These are the two options then for both combat and non-combat, lawful and unlawful players who will now all have methods to get into this endgame content as an organization.
I think in Star Citizen and a game like this, I think that if there is anything that involves the control of assets and the control of resources, it almost 100% has to be PvP enabled. I don't foresee anything of this being 100% free of PvP. Which sucks for people who really do not like PvP at all. But I don't think that's the kind of game Star Citizen is,
Getting a claim, though, is only the start, and the real work would be
how much of this has been stated? 0. This is just theory crafting.
And after that. So let's move on to the next phase.
I'm just answering his theory crafting with stuff that we do know.
In this phase, the construction would begin, and it would involve industrial players as well as combat players if the station is located in hostile, contested space. The industrial-focused players would be tasked with obtaining specific kinds of resources needed for the manufacture of the main superstructure, or the foundation, if you will, of the organization's station. While these resources are collected and deposited on location, if the claim is in hostile space, the collection point may need to be defended.
Welcome.
Defense could come in the form of either players or player-built turrets. This wouldn't be a very short phase. It would require a great deal of resources and time of an organization to complete, weeks and maybe months. The more players, the faster the resources could be collected, but the build time, I would say, should be a function of an automated mechanic for the station slowly appearing as resources are gathered. I would prefer it not to involve an expensive player ship if possible, but it's inevitable that it might, seeing as how that's how Star Citizen funds the project. So we might see an alternate version then of the Pioneer that builds these stations.
Yeah, I think a Pioneer that builds space stations is actually a cool idea. Not for nothing. I mean, like, again, I think 90% of what Morphologist here is just going, hey guys, wouldn't it be cool? And I love videos like this. But again, just remember, everything here is theory crafting. And even when I'm like, countering a theory craft or saying how would this work? I'm just being, I'm being a stick in the mud using information that we already have. But I think this would be kind of cool.
Once the main superstructure is finally complete, the cladding is built, the outside is done, it would then be time to start filling the station with components that augment its functionality, as well as building up the station's defenses to defend it while you continue to build the inside. Let's move on then to Phase 3. With the initial phase complete, all you would have is a basic landing pad, maybe a hangar, with a basic lobby and a basic level of inventory for the org. To get the station to be profitable, though, is going to require a bit more time. Station customization and specialization would then be necessary. The first step in this phase might be to create an administration office, which would enable you to tax the refueling and repair modules that you could build onto the station to repair and refuel ships that stop by.
So right now, it's almost as if he's talking about, like, I guess, mechanics that have been kind of toyed around with, like things like the Banu Merchantman and things like that, where you'll have a bazaar section that will be able to host different stores. We still to this day don't know 100% how gameplay for the Merchantman is going to be. Are you the pilot, the one, or are you the owner of that ship, the one who stocks those stores and they're just arbitrarily under your umbrella, like different brands and they have different things? Or do you host the space for people to sell their stuff? Deep Space Nine style. I mean, like, will you be able to, like, say, sure, Quark, you can have your bar here in my station. Sure, like Garrick, you can have your tailor here in my station. Or is it all just player owned and player governed? We don't really know. So the reason I bring that up is because, like, if they would have stations do that this way, then it kind of like defeats the object of having things like the Merchantman in the first place. Especially when we're saying, what will you be doing while you are trying to get yourself a Bengal class carrier? Like all the stuff that we have right now, having this, like, commerce area and stuff like that seems to not only be more compelling than having a battleship, but also it seems to be more compelling than having something like a Merchantman. Why would you have that when you have a thing like this? It seems like this, what is being proposed here by Morphologist is giving too much away, which isn't necessarily a bad thing, but I don't know how it would be able to be properly done and balanced. But then again, there's a 10-to-1 balance between players and NPCs. So if, like, 90% of the people who are there are going to be NPCs and then some guild members, I guess it could pan out. But I don't know.
This could begin to create a source of income for the organization to pay for the initial upkeep and cost of the station. Next, though, would be the specialization of it through specialized facilities. For organizations that do industrial stuff, they might install a small refinery and resource collection pod for depositing goods. They might also install things to sell those goods, like kiosks to sell stuff to players visiting. The creation of other manufacturing modules could also be added, things that could create weapon modules and modules for ships. It could also be used to be sold again for a profit or to supply org activities. Internally, the org might also then choose to
Hey Dice, so you are Bard?
add facilities like food sellers, habs for logging on and off, and probably some basic medical facilities that could maybe have one bed that allows you to recover somebody who's died. I don't want to make this too much like an alternate to main stations. It still needs to be balanced to make those main stations better than the ones that orgs can have, at least.
I mean, it already sounds so much better than those main stations, to be fair. The second that you give players player agency with these stations, you make having the normal NPC ones less desirable to go to for any reason, apart from the fact that they're there for convenience sake, you know, because they are there.
My view. Then you might also, say, add on additional landing pads or additional hangars to support more player ships and more player inventory. But the customization of the interior could be beyond just utilitarian. Adding stuff like bars and additional places to lounge with the org would also be a welcome part of this functionality.
Not to poop on everything here, but I mean, again, you have spaceships for this that have, like, you know, this sort of functionality.
Maybe using the player-facing version of Rastar to organize the internal layout to the preference of the organization.
I can't wait for
However,
that.
for the
in
sake
general.
of balance, there would also need to be a limit to the station's module amount. Again, to prevent these stations from overshadowing the main NPC faction stations.
And ships.
There would also probably need to be a mechanic to give benefits for specialization. Say, for example, the station has mostly refineries. It could boost the refining capability of that station for the org. And now it's time to move on to the final phase, because after you've customized your station, that's not the end of it.
Defense and upkeep.
The final phase would be maintenance, defense, and fees.
So, like, when it comes down to defense and upkeep of stations, a lot of this has not only been done conceptually, like by CIG in that one jump point I referenced, but also in, I believe, Theaters of War, in the Crossroads of Crime. The end goal was to destroy a station for one of the factions. So, like, you know, from a visual standpoint, that is something that exists that, you know, like, isn't too beyond the pale for CIG to just add. Especially since space stations and spaceships aren't really too difficult in general. So yeah, like, it could happen. I just don't necessarily know if it will, just because there are a few snags here and there.
Once a
you
station
know, like
has
in
been
this,
fully customized and built to
just
the
balance.
organization's specifications, the major gameplay surrounding the station will involve maintaining the station and defending it from various foes. Additionally, as modules are added, the rental fee and maintenance upkeep would also increase. If CIG wanted to get really in-depth with it, they could also do things like involve the maintenance with the engineering mechanics that they're planning to integrate, where modules and fuses have durability that results in them needing to be replaced after a duration of time or after they've been damaged. So then, as you might guess, my idea is also to make these stations vulnerable, as permanent stations would lead to all the available slots on all the servers eventually being taken and leaving no room for new orgs to participate.
And this is doable just because, again, stations and ships, there's not really too much different between them. And also the fact that if they want to have these space stations have components the way ships do, then having a space station, just generally speaking, have a shield generator on it that makes it impervious to most damage, and then making it so that you can then, I don't know, go to the station, find that, disable it, and then that enables the PvP, because now it's capturable and destroyable. That'd be kind of cool. We know shield emitters are a thing that they wanted to add. We don't necessarily know where shield emitters are anymore. Within Star Citizen's pipeline, it was put in there somewhere in the roadmap. I don't know if it's still there in the roadmap. But yeah, shield emitters are supposed to be a thing that, like, are, you know, just they're straight out of Star Wars. They just stick out of a ship, and you don't have to worry about destroying the shield generators themselves, just the tiny antenna that, like, you know, propagates the shield itself. There are a few ways they could do this to make it so that you could do these things, but you know, look at other, like, PvP MMOs like Albion Online that have, or even like a New World, that have locations that you can raid. The way that those work, they need to be triggered. You know, like, you can't just go, oh, I want this person's location. You have to, like, you know, wait, you have to declare war and then choose a time slot. And then within, like, 1 hour period, you can then attack that place. I don't know if CIG are going to go to beyond that if they were ever to do something like this, just because at the end of the day, it's a game and you have to respect people's time, something that Star Citizen doesn't necessarily do very much of at the moment. But still, you have to make it so that if somebody owns a station, they have enough time to defend it as well. But yeah,
simply uncapping the amount of locations you can have for stations would also lead to some pretty undesirable effects. I would guess that you'd get an overpopulation of invulnerable stations, cluttering every single system. Eventually, I saw it happen with Star Wars Galaxies, with player-owned cities before they eventually were cleaned up.
Or even more recently, Starbase, no?
Stations then in high security would occasionally be attacked by pirates, but their primary drain would be in the rental fees and maintenance fees. Being in high security and having high traffic would lead to a lot of wear and tear, meaning that a station that's not being actively maintained would very quickly become inoperable and eventually would be condemned by the local authorities, leaving the owning organization a set duration of time to return and fix the station and pay the outstanding fees, lest the station will be dismantled, leaving that location open for others to claim. For low security stations, their issues would be in another area. It would be in resisting both player and NPC attacks. In order for this to be fair though, those across the globe in different time zones would need to have some time to react to their station being attacked. So my proposal would be for them to adapt something like what EVE Online did, where you're given a set amount of time after the station has been attacked. The way it works is that when the station is attacked by NPCs or players, they initiate this invulnerability by damaging the station and destroying defensive structures, like turrets, for example. Once the damage threshold is met, the station then becomes invulnerable, giving that 1 to 2 day duration for the other organization to mount a defense.
Like maybe, yeah, I mean, let's buy into this for a second. So maybe perhaps when you destroy the turrets, then the station initiates like emergency defense protocol or something, and it uses its shields. The station goes blue, and then like it can't be damaged again. And then when that emergency thing then fizzles out, then you have to defend the station. It's cool. I mean, I like it from like a gameplay perspective, but I'm not quite sure we're there from a Star Citizen perspective. But we'll go into that in a second.
This will of course mean that high security stations would be very hard to siege, as attackers would have to constantly contend with the security forces of that system in the form of both NPCs and non-org related player bounty hunters. Again though, these high-sec stations would have a steep rental and maintenance cost associated with them, so they have to deal with their own set of issues. This final phase then is meant to be a constant activity for the organization that owns it. It's the endgame content. It will constantly...
In true SE fashion, these stations will not be endgame content, but rather available for purchase for real money in limited quantities.
Require an influx of new materials and money to support its existence, driving organization activities and giving them some semblance of agency over the universe of Star Citizen. It will be the nexus of the player organization where you can build your organization's wealth, support your organization's activities, whatever they might be. It might also be an important way to have a place to call home for your org, a place that you can gather, a place where you can have your logo outside the station and on the door. But I think with all of this, it doesn't actually just need to be stations. I wanted to use that as an example because it's not been discussed before. It can also be applied to ground outposts owned by orgs. All of these mechanics I've discussed could be part of those outposts.
That's fair.
In fact, I think that they should be. And it should also be part of the Bengal's endgame mechanics, in my opinion. But what do you think?
To a degree.
How does this kind of endgame content driving organization activities sound? Or do you feel that a single player should be able to do every bit of content in Star Citizen without needing anybody's help? I personally don't think that that's the point of MMOs, but I know some people might have that perspective. Let me know down in the comment section below. And if you like this video, you know what to do. I hope to see you guys in the next one.
All right, okay, we're going to tackle this real quick. I mean, I spoke quite a bit already, but I want to talk a tiny bit more in the meantime. Here is Morphology's video. Please do like and subscribe the video as well. He does a really good job of just posing all these questions and stuff and making us think about the game as well. But yeah, I mean, as far as like the space station stuff is concerned, I have a hard time buying into space station just because like Star Citizen is all about the spaceships. The entire way the game is funded and the way that the gameplay is designed is central around your spaceships. Having, even if it's a stationary location, having a place like that be a base of operations that like takes away from not only the existing Lagrange stations and like the cities and stuff, but also from the gameplay of ships, kind of makes it So it's weird and it takes it away. However, that's where it comes down to space stations. We do know, however, that Star Citizen has been like thinking for since CitizenCon last year. They showed us some concepts for the new underground facilities, and those seem to be fairly in depth. I feel like because of just the nature of an underground facility in general, yes, you as a player aren't necessarily going to be able to build one. However, you know, like when it comes to all things SC, reputation is something that like is in general just something that is pretty key. It's key to most MMOs, and so like I could see players like having or building reputation with those UGFs or underground facilities, and like you know, doing what is done here but on a smaller scale. That being said, I mean, he's posed a good question when it comes down to like what will organizations do late game. Let's I mean, that's a good question in general. Is there a late game in Star Citizen? Is there something that we should consider being late game for Star Citizen? Because in general, I mean, like some people, if you think about it, have already bought into late game. Some people have Idrises, some people have Pioneers, some people have, you know, Kraken Privateers. You know, like, are they in late game? Like, when or what should CIG provide for them that is different from the gameplay loops that they've bought themselves into in the first place? I think that's a very interesting question in general. You know, like, what is there for you to do in Star Citizen outside of the, you know, the constraints of what has been promised so far? I mean, we don't know. I guess we don't know. We know the Bengal class carrier is like that pie in the sky goal to have. And we know that, you know, homesteading and stuff is something that you can do. Exploration and like picking out your pie in the sky, or like, you know, your favorite, like, you know, biome, location and planet. You can own it, take it back to the TDD or the PDD or whatever they're called and say, hey, I want this, and pay for it is going to be a thing. You know, I imagine organizations can like, you know, come together and make their own small bases around those things. But yeah. Space stations, I'm not so sure about, but definitely I feel like the late game of Star Citizen for these bigger orgs is going to be centered around resource management. It's going to be centered around, oh, we found like the biggest Quantanium deposit in the verse to date, and this is ours. We're going to be mining it. We're going to be getting rich, and then other orgs are going to know about this, and they're going to contest those locations. How they go about doing that? Space stations or just capital ships that already exist? We don't really know, but yeah, it's a good question. It's a good like it's a good video. I really like this one a lot. I hope Morphologist does more things like this, because I like to think this way. Obviously, too much theory crafting isn't necessarily good. It's always good to go with what we currently know from CIG, so we don't get too ahead of ourselves. But yeah, like it's a good video, man. Like I'd quite like it on a smaller scale, so you could rent an office in a station or a UGF. We have big cities in Star Citizen. We have Lorville, which is like now, you know, like way bigger than Austin, Texas is. You know, like before Chris was like Lorville is about the size of Austin, Texas. Now it's way bigger than that with its suburbs and everything else. We have space stations. We have all these, you know, like in-game NPC orgs that have reputation that will be able to like allow you to do this, that, and the third, as long as you stay there for long and you grind reputation with them. You will be able to have cheaper refinery like deals and that kind of thing. It's all you know, there, at least not in game, but it's there in paper. You know, like an org could just say, okay, well, Arc L5 on the Stanton system is going to be our base. They don't have to own it, but because they're there and they're putting in the work and they have the reputation, it's more or less theirs. Maybe perhaps orgs could have an org reputation, and those, you know, like and like, let's say Arc L5 won't just treat you, the player, on a one-to-one personal basis, but based on your org's rep with that station, they'll treat you a different way on top of that as well. There are many different layers to this that could exist, and I'm looking forward to seeing how that works, because end of the day, if org rep is a thing, what if you have a massive org with 20,000 people like Test Squadron, and 100 of those guys do nothing but blow up NPCs, good NPCs? Will your org rep like now get you in a position where you are treated poorly because you're in an org that isn't looked at the same way? We don't really know. But yeah, Like, hopefully, you know, in the coming months and years, CIG will like tackle more and more of these issues and these, you know, like answer these questions. But yeah, anyway, I guess we'll launch this onto YouTube and see what everybody else thinks. Again, please do follow, like, and subscribe to Morphologist, primarily because he's the guy who makes these videos. And maybe perhaps I'll make my own content again at some point. All right. Anyway, see you in the next one.